So welcome again to Centralizing Security at Scale with Security Hub and Intuit's experience. My name is Craig Simon. I'm going to be your moderator this morning, but I don't want to spend any time about me. Let's go ahead and actually talk about the people that we want to go ahead and introduce today. So first, I've got Mr. Matt Gravelin, Principal Software Engineer on the Cybersecurity, Compliance, Risk, and Fraud team at Intuit. Working with Matt about a year now, helping Intuit run securely in the cloud. Matt, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Craig. Very happy to be here today. I've been at Intuit for 17 years. For the last 4 years, I've been in the security and compliance space. Prior to that, mainly in monitoring and observability. Also, for the last 4 years, my focus has been developing an internal compliance system known as the Automated Compliance Platform, or ACP, which has many integrations, most notably Security Hub. And I also live in San Diego, not too far from here.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much. And next, I'd like to introduce Ms. Dora Corrali, Senior Product Manager of Product Management for Security Hub. Dora, welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Matt, for being with us today. My name is Dora Corrali, and I lead the product management team for Security Hub. I've been at AWS for 2.5 years, and before Security Hub, I also worked in guard duty. I have 15 years of experience in cybersecurity, always in product management, building products and services for enterprise and consumer markets. And I'm very excited to be here today with the rest of the team.
Thank you, Dora. Now, I'd like to just ask a real quick question to the audience, but just before we start. Has anybody ever heard of TurboTax, QuickBooks, Mint, or Credit Karma? Please raise your hands. Okay. All of those products are actually built by Intuit, one of the largest small business and medium business financial services companies. Matt, for anybody that's not familiar with Intuit, would you please go ahead and give us an introduction?
Yes. Intuit's mission is powering prosperity around the world for over 100 million customers. Managing finances can be confusing for consumers. Accounting can be tedious for small businesses and self-employed individuals. That's why we're committed to helping our customers run their financial lives with confidence using TurboTax, QuickBooks, MailChimp, and Credit Karma.
Thank you very much. Now, Matt, I know that you can't say everything, but can you please at least talk about the scale that Intuit operates in the cloud?
So we have about 2,000 accounts, 10 million are AWS resources, and we receive around 20 million findings. These are evaluations on a daily basis.
20 million findings a day out of Security Hub. That's a massive amount. So we're really interested to learn how you deal with that volume. Now, Dora, let me start by asking you the first question. For anybody that's in the audience that's not yet using Security Hub, can you go ahead and please tell us about how Security Hub can help my organization?
Yes, so we have customers like you who are deploying AWS resources. And the first question that comes to mind is it secure? Do I have the right configurations to make sure that I'm not opening doors for attackers to come in and compromise my systems? And that's where Security Hub comes in to help. We conduct Security Hub is AWS's cloud security posture management service. We conduct security misconfiguration checks across the AWS environment. And in addition, another challenge that we hear from customers is that there are so many different security services, and they have to go to different consoles and different platforms in order to see what is what are the security alerts within AWS. So with Security Hub, you can aggregate all security findings so that you can search and do automated response. So let me talk a little bit about the security best practice checks. Security Hub created and maintains the foundational security best practices standard. We work very closely with the AWS services teams to define what is a secure configuration for that service. And that gives AWS's view of what is a secure configuration, and that's included into the Foundation Security Best Practices Standard. So we have more than 250 controls today for various AWS resources, and we are adding more on a regular basis. So you can see here the standards and controls box that apart from the Foundational Security Best Practices Standard, we're also supporting other industry standards like CIS, PCI DSS, and NIST 800 as well. So Security Hub generates control findings for misconfigurations, but we're also ingesting findings from other security services from AWS and third-party vendors. A few examples. We are ingesting threat detection findings from Amazon GuardDuty and cold vulnerability findings from Amazon Inspector or Qualys. Now, we have a centralized place where all the findings come into Security Hub. And what we do is we normalize these findings into the AWS security finding format. So now all the data have the same format. You can search and you can take action. And how can you take action? We send all the findings to EventBridge, and from there, you can execute your own Lambda functions for enrichment, or you can call AWS System Manager runbooks to do remediation actions, or you can take the findings to a third-party solution for ticketing or SIEM. And in addition, we send it to other security services within AWS, like Amazon Detective, that can help you do investigations, or Audit Manager that will help you prepare for an audit. So it's, in a sense, Craig, it's like having a Security Hub is a single pane of glass for all security findings within AWS.
So what I heard was that I get a central pane of glass from Security Hub for everything that runs in AWS and a whole host of third-party services that are all integrated to Security Hub. Is that correct?
That's right. And we do this aggregation across accounts within the organization, but also across regions. So you really have one place where you can go and see all the findings within your organization.
Well, fantastic. Now, for anybody out in the audience who's not yet enabled Security Hub or deployed it, what is involved in deploying and making Security Hub available to my organization?
Yeah. It's easy to deploy Security Hub. The first thing you need to do if you're using AWS organizations is to assign a delegated admin for Security Hub. So once from the delegated admin account, you can now go and enable Security Hub across your AWS organization and just with a few clicks. So it's very, very easy to enable Security Hub as well as the Foundation Security Best Practices Standard. But we understand, like customers, like Intuit here, they don't like using the console. So we also offer programmatic ways that you can enable Security Hub through APIs and CloudFormation as well. And when it comes to the integrations, you don't need to configure anything to have the data flowing from other AWS security services. As long as you have the services enabled, let's say, for example, you have GuardDuty enabled and Security Hub enabled, all the findings will be ingested automatically.
Fantastic, thank you. Matt, let's talk about Intuit's journey in starting to use Security Hub. Really, what were the major problems that you were trying to solve, and what were your requirements?
Mm-hmm. Many years ago, when Intuit migrated large workloads to AWS, it changed the way how we looked at compliance and audits. We quickly realized we needed to automate compliance. We also realized that the old methods of doing things, of taking screenshots or passing around scripts to determine compliance and posture, will no longer work. We also realized that we needed to democratize compliance by moving from a central team managing all compliance to development teams managing their own compliance. So we set 3 overarching objectives, which is to reduce audit timelines and audit fatigue, effectively manage remediation, and make compliance more consistent and continuous. We evaluated various solutions and came to the conclusion that nothing available would meet all of our requirements. Security Hub provided many of the AWS-related controls, and like that, it was a cloud-native managed service. We felt the best solution was to use Security Hub plus build an internal compliance solution to meet all of our needs. That solution became the Automated Compliance Platform, or ACP. Here's a high-level architecture of ACP that I'll walk through. Let's start in the lower left for content management and controls. This is where we document normalized control objectives and map them to the various frameworks. Up above, under providers, is AWS Security Hub, which we use as our primary provider for AWS resource controls. Besides that, we use AWS config to supplement AWS resource controls that are custom. Down below is Intuit internal providers. This is primarily for non-AWS resources. So examples here would be applications, network devices, laptops, and mobile devices. We use the integration between Security Hub and Amazon EventBridge. We've built a custom solution for config that would go directly into Amazon Kinesis data streams, and our internal providers will send directly to Amazon Kinesis data streams. From there, a Lambda will perform additional processing such as enrichment, send that to findings database, the ACP database below, which is a MongoDB database. Underneath that, you'll see an S3 bucket. This is where internal providers will send their evidence in various formats. So that could be JSON, text, PDF, and so on. In the middle of the screen is a presentation layer where users will interact with ACP. There's 2 portals. The top one is the Intuit ACP portal, which is the fully featured portal with all of ACP's capabilities. Below that is Intuit's dev portal. Intuit's dev portal is where developers go to create and configure and manage their applications. So we put metrics for compliance right beside the applications that they manage. By using Security Hub, we leverage AWS expertise with their regulatory controls and best practice controls. It helped us keep up to date as new controls are released on a regular basis. And we like Security Hub's aggregation features that consolidate findings from other AWS services and third-party providers. I personally call it the super aggregator. And we use, for example, findings coming from IAM, Access Analyzer, AWS Health, and Firewall Manager. A key component to this integration is the Security Hub to Amazon EventBridge integration. This allowed us to stream millions of findings on a daily basis to be inserted into our ACP database. I am personally not aware of any other CSPM solution that is able to use change-triggered checks that is able to stream and export that number of findings on a daily basis. So what did we achieve overall? Let's go back to the original 3 objectives, starting with reduce audit timelines and audit fatigue. So we were able to reduce our timelines for our large audits that used to take 6 months all the way down to only 2 weeks. That was a huge win. Next, the amount of reaching out by the compliance community to the development teams to collect that evidence and determine their posture has been significantly reduced, helping with that audit fatigue. Next, for effectively manage remediation, we automated the remediation process through ticket notifications, various forms of remediations, and exceptions management. This was a very successful system that resulted in compliance issues being remediated faster and easier than ever before.
Matt, I have to say, from 6 months to 2 weeks, that's amazing.
Yes.
Really
That is.
really good achievement.
And I'm just thinking out there, if anybody could think about how you could actually reduce your audit prep time in a amount like that, that is absolutely amazing.
So I'll finish off with number 3 to make compliance more consistent and continuous. So we now have a consistent system because ACP is the single system for all compliance activities across the entire company. And it is continuous due to the large amount of automation. In addition, we made compliance more transparent and consumable for everyone.
Okay, Matt, we've been pretty high level at this point. Let's start to dive in. How do you operationalize Security Hub for all the different customers you need to support?
We identified 3 types of internal customers, which is the internal compliance community, developers, and managers. Each group has their own unique set of requirements, so we developed capabilities and features for each of these personas. The internal compliance community is the driver that drives developers to remediate any issues, which drives the need for managers to have that visibility within their team. At a high level, these capabilities are enrichment, automated evidence collection and control evaluation, control to framework mapping, custom dashboards and reports, and various forms of remediation and exceptions management.
Okay, now you mentioned a number of capabilities there. Let's go ahead and let's dive in. What about enrichment? Why do you enrich findings out of Security Hub, and what do you enrich them with?
So context is key. It is the foundational component that makes all of these other capabilities possible. It's critical to have application and organizational context, especially with organizations with many applications that are running in multi-tenant accounts. Findings by default only have resource context. For example, an ARN, an account ID, or a region. There's no application or organizational context. So what do I mean by application or organizational context? For example, given any resource or finding, what is the name of the application that is associated? What team manages this application, and how do I contact them? Or what is the business unit that this application is associated? Enriching data across the platform helps produce targeted actions and insights. By attributing findings to people, it allows us to route remediation tickets to the appropriate team. And by attributing findings to applications and their metadata, provide stakeholders with meaningful metrics and dashboards. We enrich findings with as much context as possible. So let me go into a deep dive of how we do enrichment. So I'll start in the lower left-hand corner again. You may recall seeing this for ACP integration and processing. This is where findings come in, gets processed, and ultimately sent to the database. So when findings come in from Security Hub or other AWS services for that matter, they do not contain tags, even though that there is a resources tags object in the Amazon findings format. So as a workaround, we created a tag collection system that will go out to all 10 million or so AWS resources and store them in the resource tags database. For here, we use OpenSearch. Besides that, you'll see Intuit's dev portal. This is, again, where developers go to create and manage their applications. In doing so, they are required to enter a lot of metadata, such as the name of the application, the business unit, the environment, and so on. That is then stored in another database. In our case, this is S3 that we would query through Athena. So let's start from the beginning how this would work. A finding comes in. It doesn't have tags, but it has an ARN. We would look up that ARN in the resource tags database. It would return a list of tags. We would enrich the finding with the resources tags object. Then we're looking for one particular tag. We call this the asset ID tag that would look up in the assets database, and it would return all of that metadata. Then we would enrich all of that metadata in a special format that we call creatively ISFF. If you could take a wild guess what that means, it's the Intuit Security Findings format based on the Amazon Security Findings format. The glue that ties all of this together is tags. Tags are wonderful. Everybody should be loving tags. Tags are critical, and we require tags on all of our resources.
And I've got to say that I talk to AWS customers all the time. I love the fact that you're using tags. Often people ask me how to improve their understanding of their infrastructure, and it's tagging everything.
Yeah, and this is a real problem. I hear from customers all the time that they're looking to connect findings on resources with the applications that they're using. So it's very useful.
So you mentioned 3 different customers previously: the internal compliance community, developers, and managers. How specifically do you work with the internal compliance community?
Yes, so I'll talk about 3 different capabilities for the internal compliance community, starting with automated evidence collection and control evaluations. Before I continue, I should probably just define what I mean by each of these. By automated control evaluations, you can think of these as the pass-fail findings that you see in Security Hub, indicating whether a resource is in compliance. And by automated evidence collection, this is the raw data proving that a resource passed or failed control. We've developed internal methods to get this evidence in a way that works similar to AWS Audit Manager. We want to automate as much as possible. We want to be, the ideal state is to be audit ready at all times and to automate as much evidence collection and control evaluation as possible. The key metric here is control coverage. The more automation you have, the less manual tasks that you need to perform and the less time spent in audit engagements. Security Hub is not the only source of our finding, hence the need for additional providers. So over the years, we've developed a rather large community of these internal providers. We took a decentralized approach where the teams that are closest to the technology and the controls are the ones responsible for developing the automation for their findings and evidence. For example, for Kubernetes controls, the Kubernetes team would be responsible for developing that automation. In total, about 20 teams have contributed, resulting in the automation of hundreds of AWS and non-AWS controls. And as a result of this automation, the internal compliance community can see the posture for any given framework using application context as well. Moving on to control mapping. Managing each individual control across each individual framework can be very challenging. So to make this process easier, we created an internal objective to control mapping. Let's take password complexity requirements as an example. This is quite common control across various frameworks. So one control may state that passwords need to be at least 8 characters long. Another similar control would require that passwords need to be 10 characters long. So what we would do is we would take the most stringent of the two, in this case 10 characters, create a common objective, and then map that to multiple compliance frameworks. This gives us the flexibility to create new controls and map them to various frameworks or versions within those frameworks. We apply this objective to control mapping across all of our findings, including internal security policies and standards. This mapping would also sit on a layer above Security Hub's consolidated controls, but we still take the guidance from Security Hub's control mapping. Dora, do you mind telling us more about Security Hub's control mapping?
Yeah, so in Security Hub, we do map all our controls to industry standards that we support. And we recently launched a capability where you have a consolidated controls view. No matter what standard the controls belongs to, you can get all the controls along with their mappings. And Matt talked a little earlier about evidence. So we also give customers 2 options when it comes to findings. So you can get 1 finding per control per standard, which could make evidence collection easier. Or if you want to reduce noise of findings, you can create 1 finding per control across all standards.
So I will finish with dashboards for the internal compliance community. The internal compliance community is most interested in the native framework statements and organization. So as a result, we've created custom metrics and dashboards using the identical identifiers and statements within these frameworks. For example, PCI DSS version 3.2.1, section 818, and its related statement is in the native language of the internal compliance community. So I'm just curious in the audience, is there any compliance experts that knows what that says? Okay.
I have no idea.
So a small number of you, but I would assume the rest of you are likely developers or managers. So for the rest of us, what PCI DSS version 3.2.1 section 818 means is inactive user sessions must expire after 15 minutes of inactivity. And if you're curious, session expiration sections such as this one could be attributed to that lock screen setting that you see on your company-issued laptops that are controlled by a company profile. And to tie this back to the normalized controls that I talked about earlier, at least at Intuit, our lock screen setting is set for less than 15 minutes.
Okay, well now I understand why I can't go ahead and modify the lock screen settings on my corporate laptop. All right, I was trying to figure that out.
In summary, for the internal compliance community, I need to highlight once again that we're able to reduce timelines from 6 months down to only 2 weeks. And also for the automation, I should just add that for this automation, it is for a very wide scope. So this means every AWS resource, every laptop, every corporate device, resulting in tens of millions of findings and evidence. ACP became the one-stop shop for all of our compliance functions and providing self-serve capabilities to them to see compliance posture and download evidence using business criteria and not resource criteria.
Great.
Okay, thank you. So we understand now the focus of the compliance, internal compliance community. What about your development community? What are they looking for?
So starting with developers and dashboards. When developers go to the developer portal that I talked about earlier, each developer receives a unique and personalized view that is just for them. It includes the compliance metrics only for the assets that they manage and any issues that they may have. Even better, if they do have any issues, it is prioritized in order of importance. Again, this is all possible thanks to enrichment. Moving on to notifications, remediations, and exceptions. Here I will dive into a deep dive here, a lot of content. We want to shift left as much as possible in the development lifecycle. So I will begin on the left-hand side under prevention. So for code enforcement, what we do here is if we identify any vulnerable or non-compliant code, we would prevent that code from being merged into our source control. We use GitHub. Down below that, we've developed internal systems that would sit in front of deployment systems that would prevent any deployments with non-compliant code. In our case, we use Argo very heavily at Intuit. For those of you that don't know, Argo was developed by Intuit, and it is an open source CNCF project with graduate status. Moving on to automated or fully automatic or runtime enforcement. For this, we use Cloud Custodian. Cloud Custodian is also an open source CNCF project. An example here would be quad zero SSH. You should never do that. So 100% of the time, if that is detected, then Cloud Custodian will remove that access. Moving on to manually triggered, or what we like to call the fix-it-for-me capability. For AWS resources, we use Amazon ASR, or Automated Security Response. An example here would be public S3 buckets. You should probably never do this, probably 99.9% of the time, but there may be a legitimate use case that you need to have a public S3 bucket. So the developer has a choice. They could click the button to remediate, or they would create an exception below to let us know. Of course, we would want this to be managed in infrastructure as code, but we want to provide that capability, especially in cases of legacy applications or deployments. Down below is also a GitHub integration for Fix-It-For-Me, and where we can create configuration changes within GitHub or create pull requests. On the far side is manual and the remediation doc. This is where we would provide a document to the developer with step-by-step instructions. Manual is still quite common due to the operational risk and complexity of doing automation in the same way for everyone. Underneath that is notifications. Anytime that there is an issue, we will create a ticket, and thanks to enrichment, we would route that to the appropriate team. At the bottom, you'll see exceptions. I view exceptions as a foundational component. It integrates into every single component that you see above. Why? You may be asking, why is this foundational? So let's go back to that example of a public S3 bucket that is intentional and walk through what would happen. Through code enforcement, we wouldn't be able to merge. Through deployment enforcement, we wouldn't be able to deploy. If it gets past that in runtime enforcement, you may use Cloud Custodian to automatically remove that access. If it gets past that, then we would create a ticket and an alert for that team. So it is very important. So how does this work? A developer would create an exception. It would get routed to the appropriate leader, again, thanks to enrichment. And then the security leader will just make sure that this is legitimate and there's a compensating control, and it is set for an appropriate amount of time before it expires. So for developer story, I'd like to wrap up developers, I'd like to share a short personal story. So I've been in security and compliance for only 4 years. Before that, I had this Hollywood perception of people working in security and compliance, that they were working away from the rest of everyone else in a windowless office and often wearing hoodies. So I didn't have a lot of interaction with them. They were quite mysterious. I knew that I didn't have perfect compliance in security, but I wanted to be secure in compliance. I just didn't have the knowledge of how to do this. I knew the basics of passwords and maybe SSL and so on, but I just didn't have that knowledge, and I didn't have a lot of interaction with the security and compliance team. So with ACP, I felt it dramatically changed the culture of our development community and how they perceive security and compliance. So it's as if the mysterious person in the hoodie sits right next to you, hello Craig, and teaches you how to be secure and compliant as an individual developer and only for those resources and assets that you manage. So with ACP, we're not only saying that security is everyone's responsibility, we're actively demonstrating that security is everyone's responsibility.
Dora, Matt mentioned ASR in that answer. Can you talk a little bit more about ASR and how will it help customers with automated remediations?
Yeah, so the AWS solutions worked very closely with Security Hub to provide an automation architecture and library of playbooks that customers can use to automate common controls that are found in the FSBP, the Foundational Security Best Practices Standard of AWS, but also other industry standards. So the architecture allows for cross-account and cross-region remediation, and it offers more than 60 playbooks that customers can use, and it allows both for fully automated or customer-initiated remediations. But ASR is not the only automation option that we offer anymore. Yesterday, we announced the Security Hub automation rules. Automation rules allows you to automatically update Security Hub findings based on criteria that you define, and they're using attributes that are part of the finding, and no code is needed. So just to give you some use cases here, Matt mentioned exceptions earlier. So let's say that you receive findings from a specific account or resource, and because of an exception, you want to suppress these findings so they don't generate tickets and your team doesn't spend time on it. So you can look at the finding, take the account and resource information from there, and create a rule that will suppress that finding. So, and that happens at ingestion time, so it's pretty near real time. These rules can be applied by the central admin, and they will work across the organization. So it's very easy to set up and deploy. Another use case is changing a finding severity. Let's say that you have findings on an account that you know runs production applications, or you have tags that, as Matt mentioned earlier, that indicate that this application is very important for business reasons. Then what you could do is when this tag is present or when you receive findings from that account, you can escalate the severity, say from medium to high, and then different customers usually have different SLAs depending on the severity. You would go into a different workflow. We also allow customers, as part of the rules, to add notes. So for example, going back to the example I gave earlier on the exceptions and the suppression, you can also specify why you're suppressing and what is the reason. So you have, you document on every finding why this finding is suppressed. We recently launched a feature that we call findings history. So automation rules is tied to findings history. What this means is that every time the finding changes, this is kept into finding history, and you have an audit trail about how that finding got changed.
I see. So it really sounds like through a combination of automation rules, ASR, and other tools, customers can literally build themselves a workflow solution utilizing Security Hub as the basic data store.
Right, and because you centralize all the findings in Security Hub, this will apply not only to compliance findings that Matt was talking earlier, but any finding that is ingested in Security Hub. It could be, as I said, like a guard duty finding, for example, or an IAM access analyzer finding.
Great, thank you. Matt, we've talked about the internal compliance community. We've talked about the developers. Let's go into development management. What are they looking for out of the solution?
So I'll talk about two forms of dashboards, starting with a ticketing dashboard. So let's review. The internal compliance community drives developers to remediate issues, which drives the need for managers to have that visibility on their team. So for the ticketing dashboard, we will look at all of that manager's employees and all of the assets and resources for which they manage, and then we would display those tickets for the manager to easily see, including the SLAs. We take SLAs very seriously. It gets a lot of attention, and no manager wants to have their name associated with an out of SLA ticket. For scoring dashboards, you can kind of think of this as a credit score. So this also incorporates all of the employees underneath and all of the findings, and we use all of those plus add some other data, run it through a special algorithm to produce a single score for that manager. It allows upper management to easily see, let's say, who is green and who is not, and all managers need to ensure that their systems and resources are compliant at all times. Moving to reports, this is not exclusively for managers, but often used by managers, are reports where ACP would provide the capability to download reports in a CSV or an Excel format. And these are useful in cases where you need to analyze a large amount of detailed data that would be most effective to analyze in a spreadsheet. So in summary for managers, managers are now equipped with that single overall score to see where they stand for compliance, and they have a list of the the tickets of their team to see if they're in compliance with SLAs. Again, thanks to enrichment. So in final closing, ACP was not developed overnight. I want to thank the fantastic team at Intuit for making this possible over the last 4 years. We are constantly adding new features and capabilities, and it was a lot of work, but it is producing extraordinary results.
Nice. Dora, I think that Intuit and Matt really have their internal customers and their needs exceedingly well understood. But for other customers, everybody out there, how do you have seen other companies and other customers operationalize Security Hub?
Yes, so we've seen, obviously, Intuit has built a very mature custom solution. And we've seen other customers not using more of the out-of-the-box capabilities of Security Hub. Not everybody has that maturity in terms of like operationalizing and building a solution around for their compliance and security posture. But over time, Security Hub also offers some of the capabilities that Intuit's platform supports. For example, Matt mentioned the score. And we have, in Security Hub, we have a standard score. And at reInvent, I was talking to a customer and was saying when they started using Security Hub, they monitored the score and it was below 50%. And as they started remediating and fixing issues, now they're in the 80s, 90%. I love when I hear stories from customers like that, using Security Hub to operationalize and using the built-in out-of-the-box capabilities. Matt mentioned enrichment. I think this is something we hear many customers saying, like really looking at providing more business context that Security Hub might not have, and working through EventBridge and their own Lambda functions to do that so they get more information. Another use case that we didn't mention today, and I hear customers talking about, is routing security findings to their SIEM. Again, through the EventBridge integration and the integrations we have with various partners, it's very easy to forward findings and centralize them into your SIEM, along with other non-AWS data. And this is really because we offer the normalized format, and because you can also do the consistent enrichment coming out of the aggregation of Security Hub findings. Matt mentioned dashboards, and that's another capability that we have built in within Security Hub. So customers do use what we call insights and our out-of-the-box aggregations and presentations that we do, that we have in Security Hub to present the different views. You don't have to go and build your own dashboards. This is something that we offer and we see customers use. In terms of collaboration between developers and security teams, Security Hub also helps with that. And if you think about it, the central administrator account has a view of all the security findings within the organization, but development teams have access to their accounts, and Security Hub is available to those accounts and regions. So these are some other ways we've seen customers operationalize.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So again, I'd really like to thank Matt Gravlin and Dora Corrali for all the fantastic information that everybody shared today. And I want to take a minute or two just to really sum up what I'd heard. I think the most amazing statistic that I heard was a reduction in audit prep time from over 6 months to around 2 weeks. And I think that everybody out there would love to be able to go ahead and make changes in their organization that will result in a reduction in time similar to that. But how do you start and where do you go? Well, the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said that a journey of 1,000 miles really begins with a single step. But what is that initial step that we should take? For everybody out there who is not yet using Security Hub, that first step is going back to your organizations when we're done with this show and enabling Security Hub. From that, you'd be able to then go ahead and then start to go ahead and bring in all of this compliance and security data. What if you're further along with your journey? You're already using Security Hub. Maybe you can look to AWS organizations. Enable an organization and enable it across that organization. From the perspective of automated remediation, ASR, automation rules, and other features within Security Hub will allow you to go ahead and automate that. That's another step in your journey. You see, each step on our cloud journey is just a little larger and a little larger than the last. Matt For anybody who's interested in, again, thanks everybody, and love to go ahead and, again, thank everybody. Dora, for anybody who is interested in using Security Hub and not yet sure where to start, where should they begin?
Yeah, so here at Reinforce at 9:30 today, we have a chalk talk on the new automation features. So if you're interested in learning more about the recent release, you can join TDR232 and learn more. Later in the day, we also have a workshop, TDR251, where you can get more hands-on on Security Hub, see how to enable it and configure it, see some findings flowing in. If you, outside of the conference, you can try Security Hub across your organization for 30 days, and it's free. So this is free of charge. So you can scan the QR code on the left to find more details and start your trial. If you want to get a more, to learn more and do a workshop on how to activate and configure Security Hub outside the session that we have today at Reinforce, we run online workshops on a regular basis. You can scan the middle QR code, and you can find what we call activation days. And there's Security Hub experts will help you with enabling and configuring Security Hub within your environment. And if you are using Security Hub and you want to stay on top of what's new, both on the controls that we release, but also new capabilities, you can scan the rightmost QR code and subscribe to Security Hub's announcements with Amazon SNS.
Thank you. And Matt, for anybody else that wants to keep up with what's going on with Intuit and ACP, where should they look?
Yes, to learn more about ACP, you can scan that QR code that will go to an article about ACP, or to get more information about Intuit engineering blogs, it's medium.com, Intuit-engineering.
Thank you very much. Everybody, thank you for your time and attention today, and have a fantastic rest of your show. Thank you.